When the whole family was gathered around the dinner table, the man I had loved with all the years of my youth held a leather belt in his hand, walked up to me, and shouted for me to kneel and confess to infidelity. The belt cracked through the freezing air like a blade, severing all justice and truth. I didn't cry or beg. I simply pulled out a USB and plugged it into the large TV in the living room. The entire family sprang to their feet as the screen lit up with a scene of my father-in-law and my sister-in-law, my husband's brother's wife, tangled together in a shameful position. My name is Camila, 35 years old, a programmer for a tech company in Detroit. That Christmas Eve, I drove to the grand mansion in Bloomfield Hills, where my father-in-law, Richard, always held the party with his signature military discipline. The entire house was lit up like a barracks, decorated in classic style. From the tablecloths, wine glasses, to the mealtime, everything had to follow his orders. I brought along a still warm apple pie, trying to stay calm as I stepped into the freezing atmosphere that awaited inside. As always, everyone sat in predetermined order, like every year before, dead silent, as if even dropping a spoon would break the rules. Richard sat at the head of the table, whiskey glass in hand, eyes sharp and cold as razors, scanning each person to ensure no one dared to speak before he allowed it. Just as I set the pie down on the table, my phone suddenly lit up. A Christmas message from my boss. That tiny sound pierced the silence like a bomb, startling everyone. Kevin, my husband, immediately snatched the phone, his face flushed red after reading the festive message. He turned to his father, awaiting his reaction, and within seconds, Richard bellowed like giving an order to a soldier. "You want to be a real man? Handle your wife." I stood there, watching my husband tremble as he pulled down his grandfather's old leather belt from the hook, then screamed in my face, "Kneel!" Beside him, Carol, my mother-in-law, covered her mouth, trembling, eyes filled with panic, yet still unable to speak, for she had known only fear of her husband for 40 years. And Chloe, my sister-in-law, always clad in tight clothes and laughing loudly, leaned against the fireplace in a blazing red dress, sneering, "Poor Camilla, always trying to act righteous." I didn't kneel. I didn't cry. I simply walked slowly toward the 75-inch TV on the wall, plugged in the USB drive I had prepared into its port. Kevin hadn't even raised the belt yet when the screen lit up, and the fake world Richard had built over decades began to crumble second by second. The moment Kevin's belt snapped upward, the light from the TV blasted across his face, freezing his raised arm mid-air. I stepped aside without speaking. I didn't need to. The images on the screen were already doing all the work for me. The footage opened with the sound of wind slipping through the crack of the study room door. Then the hidden camera lens automatically adjusted its focus. On the screen appeared Richard, my father-in-law, pinning Chloe down on the very oak desk where he always bragged to everyone. "This is where I write my war journals, where I reflect on honor." But the honor he worshipped was nothing but a hollow shell. Under the soft yellow desk lamp, Richard was hunched over Chloe, and Chloe was moaning as if she had forgotten who her own husband was. A sharp clatter rang out. The whiskey glass slipped from Richard's trembling fingers, hit the carpet, and shattered into cold shards. I hadn't even looked at his reaction yet when the next sound exploded through the room. Carol screamed. It wasn't the cry of a mother, nor the sob of a wife. It was a scream of 40 years of suffocating rage tearing free as if her chest were about to split open. Her face flushed red, her eyes wide with panic and fury, and without a single second of hesitation, she hurled the porcelain plate she was eating from straight at Richard. It cracked in half against the chair, and right after that throw, Carol collapsed to the floor as if her body could no longer bear the weight of the truth. Chloe stood frozen, hands over her mouth, her eyes stretched so wide they looked like the skin might tear. The red tight dress she always flaunted suddenly became something strangling her own breath. That red no longer symbolized seduction. It looked like blood, like a warning, like a curse. Kevin, however, was different. He didn't shout. He didn't rush to help his mother. He didn't look at me. He simply stood there, staring at the TV, staring at the actions of the man he had always viewed as his model of manhood. The belt slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a sound so faint that if the living room hadn't been silent as a graveyard, no one would have heard it. But I heard it clearly. The belt hitting the ground sounded like the crack of an illusion breaking apart. His mind was blank. His lips trembled. I saw in his eyes the collapse of a son, a husband, a man who had never once stood on his own feet. And for the first time, I saw Kevin afraid. Not afraid of losing me, but afraid of losing the father figure he had worshipped his entire life. And I still stood there, calm as when I plugged the USB into the TV. I didn't need to prove anything, because in the end, the truth had finally chosen to speak for me. Richard cleared his throat, trying to rebuild the authority that had shattered alongside the whiskey glass. He gripped the back of the chair like a man trying to cling to the last remains of his power, then growled each word, his voice shaking but still desperately forcing command. "This is manipulated!" The whole family flinched at his volume, but beneath the trembling tone, I heard the panic of a beast cornered with nowhere left to run. Chloe burst into tears immediately, so quickly I knew it wasn't remorse. It was the reflex of someone who had survived by deceit. She buried her glitter-covered hands over her face, crying and screaming, "He made me do it! He forced me!" Her words echoed through the large room, but sounded hollow, like rehearsed lines that meant nothing against the raw truth playing on the screen. I didn't respond. I didn't look at Chloe. I didn't look at Richard. I simply dragged the timeline down and opened the remaining videos, 23 clips, documenting 2 full years of Richard's secret affair with his own son's wife. What stunned everyone wasn't the quantity, but the familiarity. The same room, the same oak desk, the same yellow lamp, the same way Richard locked the door, the same way Chloe nuzzled into his chest, the same way Richard placed his hand on her back, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And then came video number 11, the one I knew would rip apart every mask left. Chloe moaned loudly, her voice clear as if echoing directly into the living room. "Daddy, hurry! Mike is coming to pick me up," Richard replied, his tone filled with pleasure and shamelessness. "Relax, sweetheart. I'll tell Mike to go buy you some fresh oysters." Chloe in the video burst into laughter, a sharp slicing sound that cut through the frozen air of the living room. No one dared breathe, no one dared move, no one dared look at each other. Only the light from the TV reflected on the pale, horrified faces, as if everyone had just seen a person they never truly knew. And for the first time, every member of the family trembled as they looked at Richard like he was a depraved creature, a man who had not only betrayed his wife, his son, his honor, but had destroyed the very moral foundation he had spent his entire life preaching. No one spoke. Only the video continued to play, and each passing second felt like a slap landing directly across Richard's face. And in the moment, the room sank into that suffocating silence. My mind replayed a different film, one I had kept to myself for the past 2 years. The tiny fragments I had seen but brushed aside because I wanted to believe in this family. Until today. I remembered the first time I sensed something was wrong. It was an autumn evening as I cleaned the kitchen after a family dinner. Richard walked in, wearing his usual navy blue sweater. As he passed by, a strange scent hit me. That expensive oud rose perfume I knew well because Chloe always sprayed it on, even boasting, "I love this scent, it makes men turn their heads." I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she hugged her father-in-law. People do that. But when I stepped closer to gather the napkins, the scent still clung deeply to Richard's sweater, heavy and intimate, like someone had pressed themselves against him, not a polite greeting. That was the first clue. Then came Thanksgiving. I stood behind Richard as he watched football with Kevin. Under the slanted yellow light, I noticed a smudge of brown nude lipstick on his shirt collar, the exact shade Chloe always wore on holidays. I stared at that stain for 10 full seconds. 10 seconds that felt like a year. Richard's hand rose instinctively to adjust his collar, covering the mark. I remember his eyes flicking sideways, quick, like a man who knew he had just exposed evidence. That was the second clue. But everything was still just suspicion, until the Ring and Nest cameras around the house began disconnecting on the exact days Chloe visited. Not constant outages, selective ones. 1 hour only, conveniently matching her just dropping by for fun visits. The first time, I blamed the weather. By the third, seventh, eighth time, I knew it wasn't coincidence. I remembered clearly how Richard once bragged to his veteran buddies, "I can control this entire house with 10 cameras I installed myself." He said it with the smugness of a man who believes he's too smart to be caught. That day, I decided to do the one thing he never expected, use the very system he relied on to control everyone, to expose him. I opened my laptop in the bedroom, accessed the Ring and Nest devices using the admin account Richard had forgotten to change the password for. The disconnected clips weren't gone. They were hidden in the cloud. Using my AI skills, I recovered every deleted and overwritten file, each frame restored through the algorithms I build at work. One by one, the files appeared. Every breath, every zipper pulled, every look Chloe gave him as she wrapped her arms around her father-in-law's neck. Each video surfaced like another nail sealing the coffin of a rotten family. I didn't cry. I silently copied everything onto my personal hard drive, then uploaded duplicates into a 2-layer encrypted cloud server I rented in California, far enough that no one in this house could reach it. That was the night I understood. In this house, I was the only one who saw the truth. And if I didn't speak, no one ever would. But I wasn't the only one who had sensed something was wrong. There was someone else who had seen the signs. But because of love, because of trust, he convinced himself to look away. That person was Mike, Chloe's husband, a firefighter who worked so many night shifts that sometimes he only saw his wife for a few hours each day before rushing back to emergency calls. I remembered a conversation with Mike during a summer BBQ. He casually mentioned how lately Chloe kept saying she had to visit her in-laws on nights he was on duty, but his voice carried an unmistakable wobble, as if even he didn't quite believe what she said, but was too afraid to dig deeper. Then there was the time Mike accidentally saw a message on Chloe's phone when she left the sofa for the kitchen. The screen was still lit up, and the message read clearly, "Good girl." Sent by Richard. Mike stood frozen for 3 seconds, long enough for his heart to tighten and his hands to start trembling. But then he quickly set the phone down, as if afraid he was misreading things, afraid of being unfairly jealous of the wife he still believed was seductive but harmless. But the hardest blow came from a FaceTime call. Mike told me later that one night he called home mid-shift to check if Chloe had eaten. The call connected, and her image appeared, tousled hair, shallow breath, her face glistening with sweat, yet she still tried to smile. When Mike asked, "What are you doing? You sound out of breath," he heard a heavy, slow exhale in the background, a breath that didn't sound like a woman's and wasn't from a TV. Chloe flinched, her eyes darting for a brief second anyone perceptive would have noticed, then forced a chuckle. "Oh, that's Lucy. The puppy's snoring. He's really loud." 2 seconds later, she hung up, like someone trying to smother flames in a room soaked in gasoline. Mike stood there with the phone in his hand, the heart of a man who loved his wife, yet felt like he had just glimpsed through the crack of a door into a dark truth he wasn't ready to face. From that day on, Mike began to suspect. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. He still lacked proof, something to confirm that his instincts had never been wrong. And ironically, that proof was now playing right before his eyes, on the very TV Richard used to flaunt his authority. Amidst the chaos, I saw Carol still lying motionless on the floor, her face pale from the shock of having hurled a porcelain plate at her own husband. And in that very moment, a memory burst into my mind. Something I had locked away in a drawer for months, something Carol had entrusted to me, but which I hadn't fully understood until now. It was a spring afternoon 3 months ago. Carol called me out to the garden, where she often tended to the rose bushes Richard hated because they didn't match the military layout. She held a yellow envelope in her hand, so old that its edges had softened and frayed. She didn't meet my eyes. Her voice trembled like it could shatter with a single gust of wind. If one day I disappear mysteriously, take this to a lawyer. I was stunned hearing those words, but Carol offered no explanation. She simply pressed the envelope into my hand like someone sending off the last secret of her life. That evening, when I returned home, I opened it. Inside was an old photograph of Carol in 1994. One eye blackened, her lip split, her cheek so swollen she was unrecognizable. A Carol I had never seen. Not the gentle, timid woman who always shrank into the walls of this house, but a mother who had suffered so much cruelty from her husband that she had cried out for help. Beneath the photo was a police report, with the date, time, Carol's statement, and that of Officer Freddie H., who had taken the case. But at the bottom of the page, one handwritten line: "Case withdrawn by victim." I remember asking Carol, "Why did you withdraw?" She only smiled, a smile so sorrowful it chilled me to the bone. Because he threatened to take Kevin and Mike from me, and I knew he could do it. Now, with everything being laid bare on the screen, I finally understood. Carol hadn't just lived in a toxic marriage, she had been imprisoned by fear for 40 years. An entire lifetime. Not because she was weak, not because she was naive, but because she was a mother, and mothers will endure pain if it means their children can be safe. But today, for the first time, her silence broke. The plate she threw at Richard wasn't an outburst. It was the first explosion from a heart that had been suffocating for 4 decades. And I knew, if I didn't keep going, all of her sacrifices would disappear into the dark again. And at that moment, as I looked at Richard standing petrified in front of the TV, other pieces in my mind began falling into place. Small financial details I had once questioned, but never found a satisfying answer for. I had been managing the family's expense system, not because Richard trusted me, but because he saw me as the tech daughter-in-law who knows computers, so just handle this for me. I was used to checking the monthly spreadsheets, making little reports at Richard's request, as if it were routine admin work. But the more I reviewed, the more something felt off. There were recurring transactions labeled under vague terms: maintenance cost, outdoor upgrade, consulting fee. No invoices attached, no notes, no listed recipients, and all were transferred to the same account: RV Holdings, LLC. At first, I thought it was one of Richard's side real estate ventures. He had once bragged about knowing people in the property industry, but when I checked the Michigan Business Registry website more closely, I froze. RV Holdings, LLC had only 2 registered members: Richard Vaughn and Chloe Vaughn, my sister-in-law, Mike's wife. The same woman who had just been shown naked on the TV minutes ago. When I discovered this, I sat in silence for hours in my tiny home office, my hands ice cold, my heart pounding like it might burst. Not from jealousy or shock, but from the visceral sting of betrayal, like a slap across the face. Richard hadn't just betrayed Carol, or Mike, or the family. He had used the family's shared assets to fund his affair with his daughter-in-law. I began investigating deeper, cross-checking each transaction from the past 24 months. The number that appeared was cold and clear: $280,000. Over 2 years. Withdrawn from the family account. Directly deposited into the LLC owned by Richard and Chloe. Not petty cash, not gifts. It was outright theft in plain sight. I checked every invoice, every bank statement, every online banking record. And what chilled me most was, everything was legal. Everything was traceable. Everything had a paper trail. Richard never thought anyone would notice. Never thought anyone was smart enough to follow the trail. Never thought someone was silently watching. I remember sitting there late at night, hands shaking, but still saving every file into a folder labeled Forward Evidence. I duplicated them, zipped them into multiple backups, uploaded them to an encrypted cloud, and documented every date, every amount, every reason for transfer. Each number became an irrefutable piece of evidence. Each transaction, a deep cut into the moral code Richard had always preached. And now, as he trembled before the TV, those numbers became invisible weapons in my hands, stronger than anything that could be dismissed with a "this is manipulated." Financial truth, just like video truth, cannot be erased. And in the moment when every mask was torn away, from betrayal to money, I watched Kevin break apart right before my eyes. He staggered one step, then suddenly dropped to his knees, his trembling hands clawing at the carpet, like a man searching for the last anchor of a life that had gone wrong for far too long. His voice cracked, as if something was lodged in his throat. I I was tricked. I'm sorry, Camilla. I'm sorry. His shoulders shook violently. His head bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. But I did not reach out to lift him. I did not comfort him. I did not touch his hair. I did not erase his humiliation with any easy forgiveness. I looked straight at him, into those reddened eyes that seemed to have just awakened from decades of blind obedience, and I said softly, but sharp as a blade, "You hit me, before you even let me speak." Kevin lifted his face, and in his eyes I saw complete collapse. Not because of the videos, not because of the truth about his father, but because he finally realized he had become Richard's shadow without ever noticing it. I quietly turned away. No sigh, no tear. I picked up the wool coat draped over the chair, slipping it onto my shoulders as if I had prepared for this moment long ago. Outside, the Michigan snow was still falling, large, white flakes as though trying to soften every wound on the ground. I walked toward the door, unlocked it, and the cold wind hitting my face made me feel more awake than ever. No one called out to me. No one dared stop me. No one had any right to say anything anymore. I whispered a single sentence, not for anyone else to hear, but like a farewell to the life I was leaving behind. That's enough. Then I stepped out of the house, leaving behind the sobbing, the trembling whispers, and a family coming apart at the seams. In the sharp, restless Michigan cold, I climbed into my car and drove without looking back, afraid that a single glance might pull me back into that toxic vortex. I didn't know how long I had been driving, only that my hands were still shaking with adrenaline, and my head throbbed with the weight of too much truth collapsing in a single night. By the time I realized it, I had turned into the hotel district near the airport, a place where I knew I could disappear into the anonymity of hundreds of flights a day. I chose the Weston Detroit Metropolitan Airport, far enough, quiet enough, unfamiliar enough that no one could find me quickly. I checked into a room on the 8th floor. The door clicked shut behind me, a small sound that made me feel safer than anything else so far. I turned on the warm yellow lamp, its glow soft enough to make me want to crumble onto the bed. But I couldn't. Not tonight. I opened my laptop, set the USB on the desk like the most important piece of evidence in my life. Then, one by one, each file, each video, each bank statement, I uploaded them to the second cloud server, the private system I built years ago for a night exactly like this. Every successful upload felt like a deeper breath filling my lungs, a backup for the truth, an insurance policy for my life. When the backups finished, I logged into Michigan courts. Anyone in Michigan who is divorced knows everything can be done online. I entered my name, Kevin's name, our address, the reason for the divorce, domestic violence, and infidelity. I clicked submit, and the moment the button turned gray, I knew my marriage had finally left the hands of anyone but my own. My phone lit up. Kevin called. First time, second, 10th, 17th. I blocked him after the 17th call, my finger cold, but my heart no longer trembling. Then the phone buzzed again. Not Kevin. Richard. He didn't apologize, didn't ask about his wife or his sons, didn't acknowledge fault. Only the cold, heavy voice I knew too well echoed in my voicemail, striking my ear like a hammer. All you need to do is delete everything, and our family will go back to normal. A second message arrived, shorter, sharper. You will suffer very quietly if you don't comply. I inhaled slowly, then opened my messaging app and forwarded everything, all of it, to Amy, Kevin's cousin. The only person in that household who had ever stood with me. The one who had seen Richard scream at Carol and once whispered to me, "If anything ever happens, call me first." I added one line, "If something happens to me, give all of this to the police." After sending it, I set the phone down, my palms ice cold. But inside my chest, I knew I had just done what Carol never dared do in 40 years. I saved myself. But I never expected that within the next 24 hours, the truth I had carried for 2 years would become a tidal wave swallowing Richard's entire family, one by one, layer by layer, leaving no one untouched. The next morning, while I sat by the hotel window watching planes lift off the runway, my phone buzzed nonstop. Amy messaged, "Camilla, the videos reached the Veterans Association." I froze. Richard had lived for his honor as a retired lieutenant colonel, lived for the nameplate at his door, reading Lieutenant Colonel Vaughn, Ret, lived for the rigid Sunday morning ritual, where he forced Carol and his sons to stand in silence for 2 minutes as the flag was raised. And now, the Veterans Association had issued an official notice. Richard was stripped from the honor roll. No hearing, no reconsideration, just one line: severe ethical violation. His former comrades, the ones he always bragged still respect the hell out of me, immediately turned their backs, not because of the affair itself, but because he had used the military's name to conceal his private filth. The neighbors in Bloomfield Hills were no less ruthless. It took only one leaked clip, and yes, it leaked, for whispers to spread like weeds after rain. The honorable colonel slept with his daughter-in-law? Unbelievable. And with that scandalous Chloe, no less. Poor Carol, all those years. The reputation Richard forged with military steel collapsed faster than the ticking second hand of a clock. And Carol. That afternoon, Amy sent me a short voice recording. Carol's voice was soft, trembling. "I'm gone. I've had enough." She left the house that had imprisoned her for 40 years and moved in with her sister in Grand Rapids. Amy said that when Carol stepped out of the car, she laughed. A weak, shaky laugh, but a real one. "It's the first time I feel like I can breathe," she said. Chloe wasn't as fortunate. When Mike, her husband, finished watching all the videos, he said nothing. Didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't break anything. He simply packed his things, walked out the door, and filed for divorce on Christmas night. Amy witnessed it. She messaged me only one sentence. Mike looked at Chloe like she was a stranger, and then he left. Another family shattered. All because one man and one woman chose betrayal over decency. But the aftershocks didn't stop. The next morning, just as I opened my eyes, my phone lit up again. Amy was calling. This time, her voice wasn't calm. It was panicked. "Camilla, Richard is in the hospital. Stroke. Kevin's at Beaumont." I went still. Richard, the man who once roared that a colonel never falls, now lay motionless, half paralyzed. The stroke hit after a night of tension, threats, and the collapse of his honor. Everything he used to control others turned back to destroy him. A brutal irony. According to Amy, Kevin had been sitting in the hospital for 12 straight hours. No food, no sleep, never leaving his father's bedside. One night, Amy saw him slumped in the hospital hallway, his head in his hands. "Why did you do this, Dad? Why did you turn me into this?" But Richard could no longer answer. No nursing insurance, no veteran benefits, no one left to shoulder the burden. And the burden fell on Kevin, a man who had just lost his wife, his home, and himself. To pay the medical bills, Kevin sold the house in Troy, the house he once dreamed of raising children in, the house he had shown me with such pride. Amy said that when the new owners moved in, Kevin sat alone in the empty living room. "I lived my whole life for Dad, and now I have nothing." The guilt weighed heavy on him. Not because he lost everything, but because, in the most critical moment, he chose to hit me, simply because his father gave the order. And I understood then. Some sentences in life enforce themselves, without me needing to lift a hand. A year had passed since that snowy night. A year long enough for people to shed their old skins and grow anew, deep enough for wounds to heal without throbbing every time they were touched. Looking back, it all felt like a movie in which the protagonist had only just learned how to step out of the darkness and walk toward the light. And that light came from someone I never expected. Nathan, my colleague at the tech company in Detroit, the one who always gently asked every morning, "Did you drink enough water today?" The one who quietly left my favorite coffee on my desk when I was too busy to leave my seat. The one who stood beside me in every meeting, never overpowering, only silently supporting. I used to think that was just politeness. After the divorce, I understood. It was kindness. And it was only after the divorce that he finally said the words he had hidden for 3 years. "I've liked you for a long time, but I waited until you were free." I broke down crying in the car he drove as we wandered through Ann Arbor, a leafy university town, where autumn roads were blanketed with golden leaves, where everything seemed to slow down just enough to let people breathe. We married the following spring in a small ceremony with only a few family members and coworkers. No hard liquor, no yelling, no patriarchal rules. Just white flowers, soft sunlight, and a simple vow I had longed for all my life. I respect you. Now, we live in a small house in Ann Arbor with a light gray roof and wide sunlit windows. I no longer need a grand mansion to prove anything. I just need peace. Every morning, Nathan opens the curtains to let sunlight flood the living room, and I make peppermint tea. Its scent reminding me that the day can begin gently instead of fearfully. And at the center of this little house is the most precious thing in my life. My daughter, Lily. She came to me like a gift life returned after all the years of endurance. Every time I hold Lily, see her round little face, bright eyes, and the way her tiny hand grips my finger with absolute trust, I feel as if I've been born again. Lily is not just my daughter. She is the symbol of a new life. A life where I am loved, respected, and free. A life where I no longer bow my head to anyone, no longer ask for permission to breathe, no longer fear someone's footsteps in the house. Lily is proof that I survived. And not just survived. I broke free and rebuilt myself. One weekend afternoon, as Ann Arbor's golden light filtered through the treetops, I buckled Lily into the car and told Nathan, "Let's swing by Costco to grab some diapers." My life now was startlingly simple. No chaos, no fear, just little things like buying diapers, picking milk, and listening to Lily babble in the shopping cart. That Costco afternoon was crowded, carts rattling over the tile floors in steady rhythm. I picked up the brand of diapers Lily liked, placed them in the cart, then turned to see Nathan reading the ingredients label. I remember smiling, the kind of peaceful smile I thought I'd never have again a year ago. But as I turned into the home goods aisle, the metal wheels of another cart suddenly came to a stop directly in front of me. I looked up. Kevin. He stood there, gaunt, his cheekbones jutting out, deep shadows beneath his eyes, as if he hadn't slept soundly in weeks. His cart held only a few cheap items: instant noodles, paper towels, a pack of bottled water, no expensive coats, none of the polish of the man who once lived in the Bloomfield Hills mansion. And what caught my eye most, on his ring finger, was still the old wedding band. Kevin looked at me like someone unsure how to even stand. His throat moved a few times before he managed to whisper a single sentence. "I'm sorry." No dramatic tone, no excuses, no blame. Just one short sentence, but it fell with the weight of a lifetime of regret. I looked at him. For a few seconds, I saw Kevin kneeling on the carpet, the belt slipping from his hand. I saw the man who had trembled before the truth of his father, who had lost everything, who had broken down in the hospital hallway as Amy described. But then I looked down at my own cart, where Lily was sucking her thumb and Nathan was bending over to fix her messy hair. My life had turned a new page, and that page had no room for the past to return. I simply nodded, gently, calmly, without anger or blame, as a quiet closing. Then I took Nathan's hand, pushed the cart forward, and left Kevin behind in the busy crowd at Costco. I didn't look back, because sometimes forgiveness doesn't come in words. It comes in choosing to move forward with those who deserve to stay. Even though I had left it all behind, the shattered pieces of the Vaughn family continued to fall, quietly, heavily, beyond anyone's control. And the one who bore the most of it was Richard. One winter afternoon, as light snow blanketed Ann Arbor, Amy sent me a photo. In it was Richard, sitting in a wheelchair, inside the vast mansion in Bloomfield Hills. A house once filled with shouting, commands, the stomp of boots on hardwood. Now so empty you could hear the metal of the wheelchair gently scrape the floor. Carol was gone. Mike was gone. Kevin no longer lived nearby, only visiting when the doctors called. No more maids, no more neighbors dropping by, no more military flag flying proudly out front. Only wind echoing through hallways and cold, bare walls. In front of Richard was the large TV he once used to force the family to watch his old speeches or football games. Now, the TV was on with the volume so low it was almost silent, a bitter irony. The man who once used his voice to control others could no longer speak a full sentence, and no one cared to listen. Richard sat motionless, one side of his face drooping, his right hand curled tight, his left hand trembling constantly. He raised it, trying to grasp something, but touched only air. Amy said that gesture repeated over and over, like an unconscious reflex, as if he were trying to hold on to the power life had taken from him. Right beside him sat an old family photo, a young Carol, smiling gently. Kevin and Mike on either side, bright-eyed and carefree. And Richard, in the center, in full uniform, eyes full of pride. Richard stared at that photo for a long time, a very long time, until his left hand shook so violently Amy had to rush over and hold it down. But when she asked if he wanted the TV turned off or the lights on, Richard gave no answer. He only looked at the photo like a man who had finally realized, too late, that he once had a family. And he never knew how to keep it. Now that everyone had left, all that remained was silence, cold, and an old man trembling in a wheelchair inside a house far too large and far too empty. I read Amy's message, looked at the photo of Richard frozen in front of that old family picture, then gently set my phone down. There was no satisfaction, no victorious revenge, only a strange calm, as if life had quietly closed a door I no longer belonged behind. That afternoon, the Michigan air was so cold my breath turned to mist. I carried Lily to the car. She giggled, her arms flailing, eyes sparkling like morning dew on the windshield. I placed her in the back seat, buckled her in, then wrapped a cream-colored scarf around her neck so the wind wouldn't sting her skin. Nathan stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder, a reminder that I no longer had to face anything alone. I closed the car door. A breeze swept past, lifting my hair gently. Michigan was still as cold as the year I left the Vaughn house, but I wasn't the same. I was warmer, freer, more at peace. And in that moment, my 10-year story, the arguments, the silences, the emotional bruises, the nights waking in fear of shouting, all of it condensed into a single closing truth. The tighter someone tries to control, the more they lose when truth breaks free. The silent will one day speak, and a woman only needs to rise once, at the right time, to change her fate forever. Nathan started the car. I looked at Lily through the rearview mirror. She was sucking her thumb, her innocent eyes staring at the world I had made safer with my own hands. Then we drove away, leaving behind not just another winter, but an entire old life. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share this video so that more women can find the strength within themselves. Thank you for listening.